so hard for me to pick. People ask me that all the time, what my favorite class is to teach. And so sometimes I gravitate and I say, oh, I love teaching Shakespeare because it's just so much fun. And I love teaching students that Shakespeare is not what you studied in high school necessarily. Like if it was this sort of laborious experience working your way through this confusing long poem sitting in your desk, maybe reading out loud, it's not like that. So I love teaching Shakespeare, but then I teach a class on Milton, John Milton and Paradise Lost, and I love teaching that class because of the philosophical debates that my students have in it and their encounter with this, story of the Christian scriptures and how it's adapted in this poem. And so I love teaching that. But then I teach English 2610 and I get to teach a little bit of Chaucer and a little bit of Beowulf and a little bit of Shakespeare and a little bit of Milton and a little bit of that. So I can't pick. I really, really love my teaching assignments. And so I don't mind what my department assigns me to teach. I don't care if it's at the lower division or the upper division. I tend to pretty much enjoy it all. The main way I think that I work on really connecting my students with Shakespeare is teaching them how it's a play. It's not a long poem. And so we wrestle with the dramatic problems in the play. We treat it like it's a script. And so when these characters are doing this thing in this scene, how do you solve this problem? Where are they standing when they talk to one another? And it's not just who says what, but it's how do they say what they say? What tone of voice are they speaking in? Where are they standing? What is their mood? What is their attitude? If you were this character, what would be your physical stance in regard to this other character? So I do a lot of performance exercises when I teach the text, even for English majors. And so I make them get up out of their seats and I'll be like a director and I'll say, okay, so if we run this scene from Othello this way, with Iago being really Othello's friend and he wants to help him and he loves him and he's really concerned about him. And then we run it this other way where Iago is an evil, manipulative, horrible man out only to serve himself. How does that change the way Iago delivers the lines? And so we'll run it a couple of different ways and see what happens. It's hard for me to remember a time when I didn't love it because as soon as I started teaching, I was 23 and I just finished my bachelor's degree and I went into my master's program and I was immediately assigned to teach English 1010, right? I was this TA in this big graduate program at the University of New Mexico. And as soon as I started teaching, I was like, man, this is the best thing ever. I just loved it. I mean, I come from a family of teachers, so it may just be that I have in me this orientation to share information and to get people excited about it. And so I think I teach because I really feel like that's my opportunity to make sure that people experience growth. Because every course you take is a growth experience. And so you get to work on not just the content knowledge, but how you contextualize that content knowledge. How does it relate to other things that you've studied? How does it relate to the world at large, to history, to politics, to your personal life, your faith, your philosophy, right? That kind of thing. So to me, it's about growth, really. Learning is growing. Right. I thought about that question because, you warned me you were going to ask that question. And so I was like, wow, what would I say? And so, I mean, my biggest answer would, I think, just be simply the printed book. Right, the printed page as a cultural product, which is a relatively new product in human history. 1,000 years old, roughly, Gutenberg. And so I thought about that, and what would the world be without that? What would my career be without the printed book? I couldn't do it. And so sometimes I struggle a little bit, like, how do I adapt to students who want to use an e-reader in class? How can I teach them? How can I figure out a way to work with them when they don't have that printed page that they can make a little note on and scribble on and interact with that way? So probably, the printed book, because the printed book then gives rise to something like Shakespeare's First Folio in 1623. And without that, we wouldn't have something like, I think it's 18 of Shakespeare's plays were not printed before they were printed then after his death. So that was, I think, the sort of easiest answer I could come to. On that, I would say that more recently, as I've really been shifting my pedagogy about teaching Shakespeare towards this very strong performance orientation, I think drama as a cultural product, which is such an ancient cultural product, right? And some of the earliest texts we have from ancient Greece are plays. And so I started going to plays when I was about 7, I think. My father was a professor. He taught some drama, and I went with him to go see plays. And I remember very clearly, being at particular plays from the time I was a pretty little kid. And so seeing theater I think is a big thing for me in terms of cultural product also.
And how do those two things, you've communicated their importance, I wonder how they move you.
Because I think that without the printed word, we lose a great deal of the past. We don't have that sort of memorial record of what people's lives in the past have been like. And I mean, some of my motive, I think, for liking older literature is in that I'm sort of nosy about the past. I want to know, what were people's lives like day to day? I mean, I love, for instance, reading autobiographies from the past, because it gives you that sense that, not an unmediated sense, but a less mediated sense than, for instance, a piece of fiction does about the past. So without the printed book, or at least without the written word, even in manuscript form, I think we would lose so much of the past, and the past is fascinating to me.
Does it make you sad sometimes when you think how recent the printed page is?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to have more from the past, like more record of, what was life really like in ancient Egypt. If, did we get things recorded in hieroglyphs and stuff, and a little bit of hints and stuff about the lives of common people, but typically the printed word, especially the artistically engraved word on a wall, privileges the wealthy and few. So you lose, what was a woman's life like who was a cook in the household of a minor civil functionary or something like that. So that access to the past, right, those windows into the past, and I think that's what both the printed page and also drama gives us.
And not just the past, but also all parts. Like all parts.
Yeah.
Even with the printed page, before realism, there was this unfortunate tendency to do what you described, to have only the important, quote unquote,
exactly,
people, be pictured or written about.
Yeah, so you really have to go digging, I think, and I've loved the scholarship in the recent past of people who are sort of digging into the lives of the more common people, in as much as we can, reconstruct that and get an idea about what it was like. It's just so interesting to me. That is a super difficult question to answer. I don't know if I can pin it down. It's just so much of my life has been spent sort of consuming text for, 25 years of my life, right? More than half my life I've been engaged in this sort of intensive textual study project from the time I started college until now. And so it's so hard for me to name one. I think that in a sort of really sort of general sense, although I don't think I could talk about the specifics of it, any number of like feminist critics, I think, that I read pretty early in my college career sort of helped orient me to a different way of reading text. So for instance, I remember very vividly reading for the first time Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Woman and thinking, wow, I didn't know people were thinking about this in 1798 or something like that. So this idea that equality and women's rights was not something that happened when women started burning their bras in the 60s or something like that, and that was a real revelation to me, I think. And I mean, I certainly grew up in a household that empowered women and that, pushed education for the daughters and that kind of thing. And I think I probably could call my dad a feminist, but not in the same way that I am. And so that, I think, shift in consciousness was really important to me. And so when I teach, especially in a course that allows it, I like to make sure and expose my students to women authors from the past to give them that clear idea that it wasn't just men who were writing. Yeah, women wrote a lot less, and they published less because of any number of cultural strictures against women sort of exposing themselves in this way. But that there were women writing and publishing, and that they were women thinkers and philosophers and poets and dramatists in the past. And so I really like to sort of pass that knowledge on to my students without pushing any kind of feminist agenda, but like, look and see, here's what some of these women were saying. What do you think about that?
So actually, I have an interesting follow-up to that one. Because I've often wondered this. Do you think, how, I don't know, the presence of phallic power, for lack of a better expression, seems to make us get all, I don't know, swooning when we think about Milton and Shakespeare
right,
and
yes.
these people.
Yeah.
do you think that the desired for outcome of our efforts as feminist critics, do you think our desired outcome is to make it so that we swoon for the great female thinkers, or is the desired outcome that we don't swoon for anyone anymore?
To me, the desired outcome is that we problematize any text that we look at. Is that you look at Shakespeare, and I mean, one of the things I let my students do from the very beginning in the first day of class is say, okay, so let's talk about why this is hard, right? Why is reading this text hard? And so let's just think about the challenges of it rather than, bowing down at the altar of it and worshiping it. Yeah, I mean, I can wax rhapsodic about it if I want to, but I'm very willing to acknowledge the shortcomings in any text I read written by a man or a woman. There are limitations in it. There are places where that author is a bad poet or a closed-minded thinker or lazy or a bad dramatist or a lazy writer or has an axe to grind and can't encounter any kind of alternative viewpoints. I mean, I'm perfectly willing to pry open the cracks in any text I come across.
When do you think that sort of approach has started to be welcome?
I think that's a post-structuralist approach, I would say. I mean, I would say sort of post-mid-70s, so in the whole time period, certainly of my academic life, and probably much of the academic life of many of my professors, the young professors I had certainly when I was in college in the late 80s and the 90s. I think that, I would say that the instability of text idea that's at the core of post-structuralism is probably what gives people that orientation to be less reverential towards text and more willing to critique it.
Here's another question on that same vein. So is the outcome, is the consequence of this shift, is the consequence that we're not reverencing, or being reverent towards these thinkers, these producers of literature and so forth, does that mean that our art suffers? Does our art suffer because of this change in attitude?
I don't think so. I mean, when you study contemporary drama, there's certainly, very fine plays being written and produced in the present time. I mean, I went to go see God of Carnage up in Salt Lake City a couple of weeks ago. And I wasn't familiar with the play. I don't read contemporary drama, but I like to go see it. And I loved it as a play. I thought it worked really well. I mean, that you became involved in the lives and the struggles of those characters, and you loved and hated them at turns in the plot and in the dialogue. So, I don't know that art suffers because we're less respectful of the artist.
Can it improve art?
I think it can make artists more careful and more aware of their own perspective, the limitations of their cultural ideology that might impact what they choose to do with art. I think it could make artists more critical, which it might improve art. I never thought about the answer to that question, but I think it could. I don't have a lot of faith that critical orientation is going to get rid of hegemony or patriarchy. I have a postcard on my fridge that says, "I'll be post-feminist and post-patriarchy." And so I don't necessarily think it's something that's going to go away. I think that humanity is making very incremental steps towards treating all people with more respect and more equality. But, Occupy Wall Street or whatever will prove to you that there are still a lot of people who are being disadvantaged. Even people who are not politically active in that way, I think, are very much disadvantaged by the distribution of wealth or power or whatever across any culture, even the most so-called equal, societies, democracies that have been established in, Sweden or something like that. Still, I don't think that means that more or fewer women are being beaten by men necessarily
in that country.
I don't know the stats on that, but my guess is that, it's going to happen regardless.
Yeah.
I think the exercise of power is endemic to the human species. I think people try and exercise the power they can exercise in order to attain dominance. And that means that there will always be dominance.
So this is eternal.
I feel that it is. I do. And that doesn't make me pessimistic necessarily, but it makes me maybe, just sort of acknowledges that, yeah, this is going to happen. I don't think that, and I don't see it as a good fight or that, I'm any kind of crusader on that behalf, but I think that teaching people to be aware of it and, where are you standing? What kind of power do you hold? What is your politics of, what's the perspective you view the world from, and how does it influence how you view the world? Your gender, your class, your race, your national origin, your religion, all of those things affect the way you read the world. And so I try and get my students to think about that with varying degrees of success.